The relentless gray of a New York City dawn was Emily Johnson's alarm clock. It wasn't the gentle, hopeful light of postcards, but a flat, weary gray that seeped through the single pane of glass in her small apartment window, promising another day of the same grind. Emily was a single mother, a title that in this city felt less like a description and more like a sentence to perpetual exhaustion. Her world had shrunk to the 5 blocks between her 4th-floor walk-up and the greasy windows of the corner bistro, and the even smaller, brighter world contained within her 3-year-old daughter, Lily. Life was a tightrope walk over a canyon of debt. Every day was a careful calculation. Subway fare versus the 30-minute walk. Fresh milk versus the bill that was 2 days overdue. She worked as a waitress at the bistro, a job that stained her clothes with the smell of fried onions and left her feet aching with a dull, throbbing rhythm that matched the bass from the apartment below. The tips were meager, the hours were long, and her boss, Mr. Henderson, had an uncanny ability to find fault in her every move, but it was a job. It was the flimsy barrier that stood between her and Lily and the cold, indifferent streets. This particular Tuesday started with a rip in Lily's last good pair of tights and the acrid smell of burnt toast. Emily felt the familiar sting of anxiety rise in her throat. She was already running 10 minutes behind, a cardinal sin in Mr. Henderson's book. She dropped Lily at the building's ground-floor daycare, a cramped but kind space run by Mrs. Petrov, giving her daughter a hug that she wished could last the entire day, a shield against the world. "Be a good girl, my love," she whispered, kissing the top of Lily's sunshine yellow hair. "Bye, Mommy. See you for stories." Emily forced a bright smile, her heart cracking just a little, and plunged out into the bustling morning. The city was already in full, chaotic swing. She dodged delivery carts and navigated seas of grim-faced commuters, her worn sneakers pounding the pavement. She was cutting through the narrow alley behind the bistro, a shortcut that shaved 2 precious minutes off her commute. When she saw him, he was slumped against the damp brick wall, partially hidden by a mountain of overflowing trash bags. He wasn't the usual kind of unhoused person she sadly had to step around every day. Even covered in grime and wearing a torn jacket, there was an aura about him. He was tall, with a strong frame, and his dark hair was matted with... Was that blood? Emily froze. This was New York. The first rule was you don't get involved. You look away. You keep moving. She had Lily to think about. But then the man groaned, a low, guttural sound of pure pain, and tried to shift. He looked up, and his eyes met hers. They were the color of midnight, intense and piercing, and in them she saw not menace, but a raw, animalistic pain. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Keep walking, Emily. Keep walking." But her feet wouldn't obey. She saw the dark, ugly stain spreading on the side of his shirt. She took a hesitant step closer. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need me to call 911? He winced, his gaze sharpening. "No," he grated out. The single word was a command, rough and deep. No hospitals, no police. Her internal alarm bells were screaming. This was bad. This was trouble, the kind her boss was always warning her about. But the sheer vulnerability in his pained expression overrode her fear. He was just a person, bleeding in an alley. "You're hurt," she stated the obvious, her voice trembling slightly. She fumbled in her purse, pulling out the small first aid kit she always carried for Lily's playground scrapes. I don't have much, but I have bandages." She knelt beside him, the smell of refuse and something metallic, his blood, filling her nose. "You need to put pressure on that." His eyes never left her face as she ripped open a sterile gauze pad. "Do it," he ordered, his voice strained. Her hands shook, but she pressed the pad firmly against the wound on his side. He hissed in pain but didn't flinch. She was so close she could see the stubble on his sharp jaw, the exhaustion etched around his eyes. He looked dangerous. Yes, but right now, He just looked broken. "This won't hold for long," she said, her voice breathy with panic. "You really need a doctor." "It's enough," he said. He reached inside his torn jacket with his good hand, his movements slow and deliberate. Emily flinched, her mind flashing to weapons, but he only pulled out a small, heavy object. He pressed it into her hand. It was a money clip, thick with bills and holding a single, black credit card. "No," Emily recoiled, dropping the clip as if it burned. I don't want your money." A flicker of something surprised respect passed through his dark eyes. He stared at her for a long, unsettling moment. The alley felt strangely silent, the city's roar fading to a distant hum. "Get out of here," he said, his voice softer but no less urgent. "You shouldn't be here." A loud bang echoed from the street, the sound of a truck backfiring, and Emily jumped. The man, Maximilian Montgomery, though she didn't know his name, tensed like a predator, his hand instantly moving back inside his jacket. "Go," he repeated, his eyes now cold and distant. Fear finally won. Emily scrambled to her feet, grabbing her purse. I hope you'll be okay." She turned and ran, not looking back, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of fear and a strange, unwelcome compassion. She burst through the back door of the bistro. 15 minutes late. "Mister?" Henderson was waiting, his arms crossed, his face a mask of pinched displeasure. "Johnson, you're late, again." "I'm so sorry, Mr. Henderson, there was a—" "Save it," he snapped. "There's a situation." He gestured to the dining room. 2 men in cheap, ill-fitting suits were sitting at a corner booth, nursing coffees they weren't drinking. They were watching the door. They were watching her. "They came in asking questions," Henderson said, his voice a low, terrified whisper. "About a man in the alley. They said they saw someone talking to him, a woman in a blue coat." Emily looked down at her own worn, blue coat. The blood felt cold on her hands. "I didn't do anything," and she whispered, her blood running cold. He was hurt." "I don't care." "Emily," Henderson hissed, "I run a respectable business. I can't have this, whatever this is. I can't have my staff getting involved with criminals." "Criminals? I just gave him a bandage." "You're fired, Emily," he said, his eyes shifting nervously to the men in the booth. "Clean out your locker. I'll mail you your last check." The words hit her like a physical blow. Fired. Just like that, the floor seemed to drop out from under her. "But, Mr. Henderson, please. I have a daughter. I need this job." "Then you should have thought of that before you decided to play nurse to some street thug," he said, turning his back on her. "I can't be associated with this. I'm sorry." He wasn't sorry. He was scared, and his fear had just cost Emily everything. She walked out of the restaurant in a daze, the men in the booth watching her every step. The city that had been her home suddenly felt alien and hostile. The gray sky pressed down on her, suffocating her. She had been fired for an act of kindness. Meanwhile, miles away, in the back of a bullet-resistant Escalade, Maximilian Montgomery pressed a fresh bandage to his side, his face a mask of cold fury. His associate, Rocco, sat opposite him, his expression grim. "The situation is handled, boss. The men who saw you were diverted." Maximilian said nothing. He wasn't thinking about the rival family that had dared to ambush him, or the pain in his side. He was thinking about a woman with kind, terrified eyes and a worn blue coat. A woman who had knelt in the filth to help a stranger, who had refused his money, and who had run away looking like a startled deer. He felt an unwelcome, unfamiliar pull, a connection to the ordinary, decent world he had left behind long ago. He closed his eyes. Her face burned into his memory. He didn't even know her name, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that he would not forget her. For Emily, there was only the long walk home, the weight of her unemployment crushing her. The loneliness was absolute. She had no one, just Lily. And now, she had no way to care for her. She climbed the 4 flights to her apartment, unlocked the door, and quietly began to search online for a new job, her mind replaying the face of the dangerous man in the alley. She didn't know it, but her life had just been irrevocably altered. The 3 days that followed were a special kind of New York hell. Emily's life, once balanced on a precarious edge, had fallen completely into the abyss. She applied for over 30 jobs online, her fingers flying over the keyboard in a desperate staccato, but the silence from her inbox was deafening. Rent was due in 4 days. The small box of Lily's favorite animal crackers was down to the crumbs. The gray of the city had seeped into her bones, a cold, creeping dread that made it hard to breathe. She was failing. She was walking Lily back from the park, trying to make their last few dollars stretch into an afternoon of free entertainment, when she saw the car. It was parked directly in front of her dilapidated building, a sleek, black serpent of a car so polished it seemed to suck the light from the street. It didn't belong. It was a predator in a pigeon coop. A man in a perfectly tailored dark suit stepped out from the driver's side. He was built like a heavyweight boxer, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He didn't look at her, but at a spot just past her ear, as if she were an inconvenience he had to manage. Emily's hand tightened on Lily's. "Come on, sweetie, let's cross the street." "Miss Johnson," the man's voice rumbled, stopping her cold. He hadn't moved. She turned slowly, her body rigid with a fear she couldn't name. I think you have the wrong person." "Oh, Emily Johnson, apartment 4B, daughter, Lily, age 3, the man recited, his voice flat. "Mr. Montgomery will see you now." The name hit her, but it didn't connect. Montgomery. Then the image flashed in her mind, midnight dark eyes, a grimace of pain, the feel of his blood on her hands. The man from the alley. "I don't know any Mr. Montgomery," she lied, her voice a thin, reedy thing. She pulled Lily behind her legs. The man, Rocco, finally looked at her. His eyes were devoid of any emotion. "He's the man you helped in the alley 3 days ago, the reason you're unemployed." The words were not an accusation, just a statement of fact. "He doesn't like to be kept waiting. It's in your best interest and your daughter's to come with me." The implied threat hung in the air, heavier and more toxic than the city smog. It was a situation she could not refuse. This was not a request. It was a summons. "Lily, she needs her nap," Emily protested weakly. "She can nap in the car. It's safe." Trembling, Emily picked up her daughter. The man opened the back door, and she slid onto the plush leather seats, her worn jeans a stark contrast to the opulent interior. The car was silent, gliding through the noisy city streets like a ghost. Lily, lulled by the smooth motion, was asleep in her arms in under 5 minutes. They didn't drive to a hospital. They drove to a tower of glass and steel that pierced the sky. Rocco led her through a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling penthouse. The view of the city was dizzying, a god's-eye perspective that made her old apartment feel like a shoebox. And there he was. He was not the man from the alley. That man had been broken and bleeding. This man stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window, wearing a dark, custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw clean-shaven. He was tall, powerful, and radiated an aura of absolute control. He turned, and the same intense, midnight eyes she remembered pinned her in place. A light, healing bruise was visible on his temple, the only sign of his recent ordeal. This was Maximilian Montgomery. "Miss Johnson," he said. His voice was the same, a deep, rough baritone, but now it was smooth, polished by wealth and power. "Thank you for coming." "You had me brought here," Emily corrected, her fear making her bold. She clutched the sleeping Lily tighter. "You got me fired." A flicker of something crossed his face. Yes, an unfortunate consequence. Those men, they were not my associates. They were looking for me. By seeing you with me, you became a loose end. Your former boss was wise to let you go. It was for his own protection. His protection, Emily's voice rose. What about my protection? What about hers? Maximilian's gaze softened almost imperceptibly as it rested on Lily. That is why you are here. He walked to a heavy mahogany-finished desk and gestured to it. On top was a stack of cash that made Emily's stomach clench, and a set of keys. That is $10,000, an apology for your job, he said. And these keys are to a new apartment, a corporate condo I own uptown. It's secure. You and your daughter will move there, effective immediately. Emily stared at him, bewildered. Move, I can't just... Who are you? He looked at her, a long, searching look. I am the man you saved, Miss Johnson. And in doing so, you painted a target on your back. The men who are looking for me are not reasonable. They now know your face. They know where you work. It won't take them long to find out where you live. The blood drained from her face. You're saying, I'm in danger because of you. You're in danger, he stated simply, and I am the only one who can protect you from it. She was being drawn into his world, a world of shadows and unseen threats. And he wasn't even giving her a choice. He was a billionaire. But the way he spoke, the way Rocco stood by the door like a silent sentinel, the cold danger in his eyes. This was more than just money. This was something dark. This was mafia. She spent the next week in that gilded cage. The apartment was beautiful, sterile, and high above the world. It had 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with appliances she didn't know how to use, and a view that almost made her sick. Rocco, or another man just like him, was stationed in the lobby. She was a prisoner. Maximilian visited every evening. He would arrive just after she put Lily to bed. He'd loosen his tie, pour 2 glasses of a whiskey that smelled like smoke and honey, and sit opposite her on the white leather sofa. He never spoke of his work, but she saw the headlines online. Shipping magnate Maximilian Montgomery, elusive billionaire philanthropist. But she also saw the other, darker whispers. Rumors of the Montgomery family's old-world connections, the unsolved accidents of his rivals. She was torn. Her mind, her reason screamed at her to grab Lily and run. His very existence was a threat. He was the danger he claimed to be protecting her from. But her heart was a traitor. In the long, silent nights after he left, she'd stand by the window, looking at the city lights. She'd remember the vulnerability in his eyes in the alley. She'd feel the strange, electric pull that filled the room when he was near. He was cold, yes, but she saw the way his eyes tracked her, the way his jaw tightened when she challenged him. He was a man of dangerous goals and dark secrets, but he was also the only person who had ever made her feel seen. She was terrified of him, but as the nights blurred together, she was forced to admit a more terrifying truth. She was starting to feel an attraction, a deep, primal pull toward the darkness he represented, a dangerous, foolish yearning, a desire that was blooming in the very center of her fear. The sterile silence of the penthouse was a new kind of prison, one with a magnificent, agonizing view. Emily's days were a blur of playing with Lily in the plush, unfamiliar rooms, while her nights were spent in a tense, strange ritual with Maximilian. He would arrive after Lily was asleep, the click of the private elevator, a warning signal to her nervous system. They would sit, separated by the vast expanse of a white marble coffee table. The glittering city lights a cold audience to their stilted conversations. "Why are you really doing this?" she finally asked one night, her voice sharp with a week's worth of pent-up frustration. She was tired of the polite charade. "This apartment, the money you left, it's more than just paying me back for a job. You're keeping me here. I'm a prisoner." Maximilian, who'd been staring into the amber liquid of his glass, looked up. His dark eyes were heavy, and she saw a flicker of the exhaustion he usually kept so well hidden. "I'm keeping you safe, Emily." "Safe from what?" she challenged. Standing up, she needed to move, to pace, safe from the men who are only looking for me because of you. You dragged me into this. You and your business." He didn't deny it. He rose slowly, a tall, imposing shadow against the wall of glass. "Yes, you are in this because of me, and I will not apologize for protecting you, even if it feels like a prison. You could just let me go," she whispered, her hands clenching. "I'd take Lily. We'd disappear. I've done it before. We'd be gone." A muscle in his jaw flexed. "They would find you," he said, his voice a low, certain rumble. "The men I am dealing with, they are not forgiving. They don't leave loose ends. They are the same people who changed my entire world." Emily stopped pacing. The shift in his tone, the sudden raw edge, held her captive. He turned his back to her, staring out at the city that lay at his feet. "When I was 21, he began, his voice quiet. "I was not meant to be this. I was not the head of the family. My older brother, Lorenzo. He was the heir. He was the one who was supposed to take over." He paused, his reflection a dark, rigid shape in the glass. "I was the spare, the one who was supposed to go legitimate, to wash the family name clean with philanthropy and shipping." Emily held her breath, not daring to move. "Our rivals decided to end that legacy. They set a fire at our family estate. It was not a simple fire." His voice dropped, becoming flat and hard, as if reciting a rote-learned lesson. "Lorenzo didn't make it out. Neither did my mother. I was supposed to be there. I was supposed to be home for dinner." She saw his hand clench into a white-knuckled fist at his side. "But I wasn't," he continued, the self-loathing clear in his voice. "I was in the city, hiding. I was with a woman I wasn't supposed to be with. I was a coward, running from my responsibilities, my cowardice. It saved my life, and it cost me everyone I loved." He turned to face her, and the cold billionaire mask was gone. In its place was the man from the alley, vulnerable, bleeding, and filled with a pain so deep it radiated from him in cold waves. "So no, Emily," he said, his voice rough. "I am not just Maximilian Montgomery, the man on the society pages. That is the disguise. The man they were trying to kill in that alley. The man who hunts the people responsible for that fire. That is who I am. I hide in plain sight to protect the very few people I have left. And now, that includes you." The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Emily felt her fear, which had been a constant, sharp prickle, dissolve into something else. It was a profound, aching sympathy that resonated with her own loneliness. She understood, in that moment, what it was to be hunted, to be solely responsible for another life. "Maximilian," she whispered, taking a step toward him, I'm so sorry." Her words, so simple, so genuine, seemed to shatter the careful control he held. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long, predatory strides. She found herself pinned, her back against a marble column, his tall frame caging her in. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap and the sharper tang of whiskey. "You should not be sorry," he murmured, his voice a low growl. He lifted a hand, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was electric, a jolt that shot straight to her core. Her breath hitched. "You should be terrified. You should be running from me. I am not a good man, Emily." "I am afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. "I know," he said, his dark eyes searching hers, as if looking for an answer he didn't already have. And then his mouth was on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision, a desperate, consuming claiming. It was all the pent-up tension, all the fear, all the shared loneliness of the past week, exploding in a single, silent instant. His lips were firm, demanding, and he tasted of whiskey and a deep, profound regret. He kissed her like a man starved, and to her own shock, she kissed him back. Her hands, acting of their own accord, fisted in the fine wool of his suit jacket, pulling him closer, anchoring herself to him in the storm. He groaned, a low, guttural sound, and one of his hands moved to the small of her back, pressing her against him, while the other tangled in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. It was raw, it was desperate, and it was the most intense feeling she had ever experienced. He broke away first, pulling back just an inch. His forehead rested against hers, and his breathing was ragged. His eyes were closed, his expression one of pained self-recrimination. "This," he panted, "is a mistake." But he didn't let her go, and she didn't unlock her hands from his jacket. That kiss changed everything. The charged silence between them was no longer just fear. It was a potent, dangerous desire. The intense romantic moments that followed were small, stolen, and fraught with the tension of their situation. A hand brushing hers as he passed her a cup of coffee, the way his eyes would linger on her mouth when she spoke. He even appeared one afternoon when Lily was awake, presenting her with a small, intricately carved wooden bird. The gesture was so unexpectedly tender, so at odds with the man who had a fresh cut above his eye, that it made Emily's heart ache. But the danger was always a silent third party in the room. He was still being hunted. He was still a target. And by staying, she and Lily were, too. Emily stood by the window long after he left that night, the small wooden bird cool in her palm. She was falling for him. A man who was equal parts gentle and brutal. A man who could order a death and then carve a toy. She looked at Lily's sleeping form, her heart torn. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she had to make a choice. She couldn't stay in this gilded cage forever. She had to decide whether to take her daughter and run, disappearing into a new, uncertain life, or to stay and face the violent, intoxicating world of Maximilian Montgomery. The illusion of safety shattered on a Thursday. Maximilian, believing his enemies were focused on a different part of his organization, had relented to Emily's desperate pleas for fresh air. It wasn't a public park. It was a private, walled garden on the roof of another of his buildings, a place supposedly impenetrable. Rocco and one other guard, a man named Corrado, stood at the only entrance. Emily was pushing Lily on a small swing, her daughter's laughter a bright, fragile sound in the contained quiet. Higher, Mommy, higher. Emily smiled, a real, genuine smile that had been missing for weeks. "Okay, my little bird, but hold on tight." The first sign of trouble was not a sound, but a silence. The low, rumbling hum of the building's ventilation system, a constant background noise, suddenly cut off. Rocco tensed, his hand going to his ear. "Corrado," he said, his voice low. "Do you copy?" Silence. "Emily," Rocco said, turning, his face a mask of stone. "Get Lily, we're leaving. Now." But it was too late. The heavy steel door to the garden, the one Corrado was supposed to be guarding, burst open, 3 men dressed in black, tactical gear, spilled onto the rooftop. They were not the clumsy thugs from the bistro. These were professionals. Rocco didn't hesitate. He shoved Emily and Lily toward a small gardening shed. "Get inside, lock it." He drew his weapon, moving to intercept them, a lion defending his territory. Emily scrambled, grabbing Lily, her heart leaping into her throat. She heard a series of short, muffled sounds, not loud bangs, but sickening, forceful thwacks. She slammed the thin wooden door of the shed and fumbled with the rusty bolt. Then, silence. Lily was whimpering against her chest. "Mommy, I'm scared. Who are those men?" "It's okay, baby. It's a game," Emily lied, her voice shaking so hard she could barely form the words. The shed door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges as if it were paper. A man stood there, his face covered by a black mask. He ignored Lily, his eyes fixed on Emily. He grabbed her by the arm, his fingers like a steel trap, and hauled her out into the terrace. Rocco was on the ground, groaning, a dark, spreading stain on his shoulder. The other guard, Corrado, was slumped against the wall, unmoving. The men had been efficient and brutal. No, Emily screamed, kicking and clawing. Lily, my baby. Leave the child. The man's voice was muffled and accented. He'll come for this one. He dragged her toward the door. Lily was standing by the broken shed, her small face crumpled in terror, her arms outstretched. Mommy? That scream would haunt Emily for the rest of her life. She was dragged away. The last image seared into her mind being her terrified daughter, alone on the roof. When Maximilian arrived 20 minutes later, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Rocco was being loaded into a private ambulance, his face pale but his eyes burning with fury. Lily was safe, wrapped in the arms of another of his men, but she was inconsolable, crying for her mother. Maximilian's reaction was terrifying. There was no shouting, no panic. A stillness came over him, a cold, absolute calm that was more frightening than any rage. His midnight eyes went black, and the temperature around him seemed to drop. "Find her," he said to his head of security, his voice a flat, deadly monotone. "Tear this city apart. Find out who did this. Find where they took her, and bring me to them, now." He was not the wounded man from the alley or the conflicted lover from the penthouse. He was the boss, and he was at war. Emily was thrown into the back of a van, her hands bound. She was terrified, but a cold, protective rage for Lily kept her from breaking down. They drove for what felt like an hour, ending in a dark, damp warehouse by the river. The man who seemed to be in charge, the one who had grabbed her, ripped off his mask. He was older, with dead, gray eyes and a long scar down his cheek. "So," he sneered, "you are the billionaire's little whore. He's not so smart. Keeping you so close, a weakness." "He will find you," Emily spat, her voice surprisingly steady. "And he will kill you." The man laughed. "He will come, and when he does, he will trade his entire operation for you. Or he will die." It didn't take that long. Maximilian's network was vast, his men loyal, and his enemies had made a fatal mistake. They were arrogant. Less than 6 hours later, Maximilian, in a dark suit and a tactical vest, stood outside the warehouse. There was no negotiation. The rescue was not a movie. It was fast, brutal, and efficient. There were no grand explosions, just the cold, calculated movements of men who did this for a living. Maximilian moved through the warehouse like a phantom of death, driven by a singular, primal need. He found her in a locked storage cage. The scarred man was holding a gun to her head, trying to bargain. One more step, Montgomery, and she dies. Maximilian didn't even blink. "You're already dead," he said, and before the man could react, Maximilian fired twice. The sounds echoed in the vast space. The man crumpled. Maximilian rushed to the cage. Shooting the lock, he ripped the door open and his hands were on her, untying her, checking her for injuries. His touch was rough, desperate. "Did they hurt you?" he demanded, his voice raw. "Emily, look at me. Did they touch you?" "No," she whispered, her body finally succumbing to the violent shivers. "No, just Lily. Is she—" "She's safe," he said, his voice cracking with the first emotion he had shown. He pulled her against him, his arms crushing her, his face buried in her hair. "She's safe. You're safe." They didn't go back to the penthouse. They went to a fortified safe house, a place of steel and concrete, hidden beneath a nondescript office building. They were alone, the adrenaline fading, leaving them both shaking and raw. Emily was wrapped in a thick blanket, but she couldn't get warm. He knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. His face was bruised, his suit was torn, and he looked utterly exhausted. "I can't," he whispered, his voice thick. "I can't do this. Emily, when they had you—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He bowed his head, resting it on her knees. "I saw you," she whispered, her fingers finding their way into his hair. "Maximilian, you killed him." "Yes," he said, without lifting his head. "I would have killed them all. I would have burned the world down to get you back." He looked up, and his eyes were filled with a desperate, tortured honesty. This is who I am. This is the world I live in, and it's not safe. Not for you. Not for Lily." "I know," she said, a tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. "I should be terrified of you, but I'm not. When I was in that van, all I could think was that I wanted you to be the one to find me." He surged to his feet, pulling her up with him. "Then you have to listen to me. They'll try again. They know you're my weakness, and I will not lose you." He gripped her arms, his eyes boring into hers. "We have to leave. Tonight, you, me, and Lily. We have to get out of New York. We'll disappear. It's the only way you'll ever be safe." The safe house was a concrete bunker dressed in luxury, but it was a bunker nonetheless. There were no windows, only screens that showed the outside world, and the air was recycled, carrying a sterile, metallic taste. Lily was asleep in an adjoining room, a room so secure Maximilian had assured her a bomb could not penetrate it. But it was a tomb. "Leave," Emily's voice was a hoarse whisper, the adrenaline from the rescue finally ebbing, leaving a cold, hollow dread. "Leave, as in, run forever." Maximilian was standing at a bank of monitors, his back to her. He was watching the live feed from the warehouse, now swarming with his own cleaners. "They will not stop," he said, his voice flat. "I didn't just bloody their nose. Emily, I took out Pietro Agnello. His brother, Marco, will burn this city to the ground to find me, and he knows you are the match." He turned to her, his face a mask of grim resolve. "I have a place, an island. It's secure. It's private. No one can find us there." Emily looked at the floor, her mind reeling. An island. It sounded like another, more beautiful cage. She thought of her life before this. It was hard. Yes, it was a constant, exhausting struggle, but it was hers. She had choices, even if they were all bad ones. She could walk in the park. She could buy Lily a cheap ice cream. She could dream of a better job. "And what kind of life will that be?" she asked, her voice gaining a small, brittle strength. "Lily. She's 3 years old. Does she grow up on an island with no other children? Does she get a new name? Do we will? We spend every single day looking at the ocean, wondering if the next boat is full of men coming to kill us." "She will be alive," Maximilian said, his voice dropping. "She will be safe. That is all that matters." "No," Emily snapped, surprising them both. She stood up, the blanket pooling around her feet. "That is not all that matters. A life in a cage is not a life. Running forever. That's not peace. Maximilian, that's just a different kind of war. I don't want my daughter to live like that." The tension in the room thickened, became a suffocating presence. He saw her pulling away, saw the old, familiar terror in her eyes. But this time, he realized with a jolt, it wasn't fear of the enemy, it was fear of him, of the life he was offering. "This is the only way," he said, stepping toward her. He was fighting the urge to grab her, to shake her, to make her understand. "Or," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears, "or you let us go. Just me and Lily. You give us new names. You send us somewhere, away from you. Somewhere they won't look because you are not there." The words hit him harder than a bullet. He stopped, his expression crumbling. This was his greatest fear realized, not that she would be taken, but that she would choose to leave. "You would leave me," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I would save my daughter," she corrected, her voice breaking. Maximilian, I can't." She couldn't say it. "I can't love you and protect her at the same time." The thought hung between them, a brutal, unspoken truth. He looked at her, truly looked at her. She was covered in grime. Her hair was matted, and she was trembling from head to toe, but her eyes were fierce. The eyes of a mother, the eyes of the woman who had knelt in a filthy alley to help a stranger, the woman who had refused his money. "I can't," he said, his voice raw with an emotion she had never heard from him. "I cannot let you go. Not like that. Not while they are out there." He was a man who controlled empires, who moved shadows and dealt in death, And in that moment, he was utterly terrified of losing her. The threat was no longer an abstract concept. She could feel it, a physical weight in the room, but her love for him, a feeling she had tried to suppress, to rationalize away, was just as real. It was a stubborn, painful, undeniable thing. It was the man who had given her daughter a carved bird, the man who had looked at her with such tortured honesty, the man who had just torn a warehouse apart to save her. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her defenses finally crumbling. "How do we survive this?" He saw the surrender in her eyes, the exhaustion, the love that she was finally too tired to hide, and it broke him. He closed the distance, pulling her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. She felt the shudder that ran through his entire body. "I will not let them have you," he vowed, his voice thick, muffled by her hair. "I will not let you go. We leave, together. I will handle Marco. I will end this, but not from here, not with you and Lily in the line of fire." He pulled back, his hands framing her face, his thumbs wiping away the tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I am getting you and Lily out of this city. We'll go to the island, just for a little while, long enough for me to cut the head off this snake. I promise you. Emily, I will not let your daughter grow up in a cage." It was a decision, a plan, a promise. It was an escape. The finality of it, the shared danger, the violent emotions of the day, it all coalesced into a single, overwhelming need. The air between them was electric, thick with unspoken words and the raw, primal recognition of what they had almost lost. This was not a gentle surrender. It was a desperate clinging. He kissed her, and it was the kiss from the penthouse, but 1,000 times more potent. It was the kiss of a man who had faced her death and come out the other side. His mouth was hard, possessive, a claim. He tasted of adrenaline and fear and a desperate, burning relief. She didn't just kiss him back. She anchored herself to him. Her hands gripped his shoulders, her nails digging into the hard muscle, as if she could pull him into her, shield him or be shielded by him. It was a frantic, wordless conversation. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, at the small of her back, pressing her body against his with a force that left her breathless, as if he could merge them into one, a single, undeniable target. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, never breaking the kiss. He carried her into the bedroom, the most secure room, the tomb, and laid her on the bed. They were still wearing the clothes of their escape, torn and dirty, and there was no time for gentle undressing. There was only a mutual, desperate shedding of the day, of the fear. His touch was not soft, it was reverent. His hands, which had taken lives only hours before, were now shaking as they traced the curve of her jaw, her neck, the line of her collarbone. He looked at her, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that stripped her bare. "Emily," he breathed, his voice a prayer. And she pulled him down, a silent, answering plea. Their coming together was not a romance, it was a confirmation of life. It was a desperate, passionate, and profound assertion that in a world of violence and fear, this was real. It was a promise made not in words, but in the frantic, possessive, and overwhelmingly tender language of survival. The first light of morning was a cruel irrelevance, a suggestion of a world that was still turning, oblivious to the life and death struggle contained within the concrete walls of the safe house. The night had been a desperate affirmation of life, a brief, passionate anchoring in the eye of the storm. But as the sterile lights of the room reasserted themselves, so did the cold, hard reality. A secure satellite phone buzzed on the command console, a harsh, demanding sound that sliced through the fragile peace. Maximilian, who'd been sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, tensed, he was dressed, his suit from the previous day a map of their ordeal, stained and torn. Emily sat up, pulling the sheet around her, her heart beginning its familiar, frantic rhythm. He snatched the phone. "What?" It was Rocco, his voice tinny and strained. "Boss, we got a problem. 2 problems." Maximilian's eyes went flat. "Go." "First, your uncle, Antonio. He's heard about the Agnello business. He's heard that you're off the board, protecting a civilian." "Heard," Maximilian repeated, his voice lethally soft. "Heard from who?" "Someone in his camp is feeding information to Marco. Antonio is demanding you relinquish the girl. He says she's a liability you can't afford." Emily's blood ran cold. The girl. She was a liability, a piece on a chessboard. "Antonio," Maximilian said, his voice dropping to a growl, "has 10 seconds to get his house in order, or I will burn it to the ground with him in it. He has no say. He has no authority. Tell him that Emily Johnson is under my protection, and anyone who questions that, family or not, answers to me." He was making his decision, not just to his men, but to her. He was drawing a line in the sand and placing her firmly on his side of it. "He won't like it, boss," Rocco said. "I don't care," Maximilian snapped. "What's the second problem?" There was a heavy pause. "Agnello? He's not just hunting you. He's found her old apartment, the daycare. Mrs. Petrov, her old boss, Henderson. He's posted men. He's not just trying to find you, Max. He's trying to erase her. He's threatening everyone she's ever touched." Emily made a small, strangled sound. "Mrs. Petrov, Mr. Henderson, people who were innocent, people who were only in danger because she had existed near them. This was her fault." She slid off the bed, careless of the sheet. "No," she whispered, walking toward him. "Maximilian, no. This is what I was talking about. It's not just us. He's using me to hurt them." She grabbed his arm, her eyes wild with a new, more profound terror. "Love can't fix this. Love isn't a shield. It's a target." He looked at her, at the raw panic in her eyes. He saw her resolve wavering, saw her love being drowned by a guilt that he had inadvertently placed on her. And he refused. He grabbed the phone. "Rocco, I want Henderson and Mrs. Petrov. I want them picked up, shadow relocated, new identities, everything. I want it done an hour ago. Send them anywhere. Send them to the moon. But you make them ghosts. Am I clear?" "Boss, the resources—" "I don't care about the resources," Maximilian roared. He was no longer the cold, calm boss. He was a man pushed to the edge. "I will not let him win. I will not let him take one more thing from me, or from her. Do it." He slammed the phone down, and his hands were on her, gripping her shoulders. His touch was hard, possessive, a borderline brutal declaration. He doesn't get to win. Emily, he doesn't get to use you, and he doesn't get to scare you into leaving me. I can't," she sobbed, the fight finally leaving her. "Yes, you can," he said, his voice fierce, his forehead pressing against hers. "You are stronger than any of them. You survived. You raised a child alone in this city. You will survive this." Their feelings, a volatile mix of love, terror, and a burning, shared rage, fused in that moment. It was no longer a question of if they would fight, but how. "We're leaving," he said, his voice all business. "The plane is at a private field in Teterboro. Rocco will have Lily bundled and in the car in 2 minutes." The escape was a blur. They moved through a series of underground tunnels, emerging in a black armored SUV. Lily, wrapped in a blanket, was asleep in a car seat, blissfully unaware. Emily sat in the back, her hand on her daughter's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall. The airfield was supposed to be secure. It was 3 a.m, the tarmac lit by pale blue lights, a sleek black jet waiting for them like a promise of salvation. Rocco was driving. As they pulled onto the tarmac, 3 black SUVs, their lights off, suddenly boxed them in. "Ambush!" Rocco yelled, slamming the car into a spin. Bullets hammered the armored glass, which spiderwebbed but held. "Stay down, don't move," Maximilian commanded Emily. He was already out the door, a weapon in his hand, moving with a fluid, deadly grace. It was a nightmare of muzzle flashes and the percussive, sickening sound of gunfire. Rocco and 2 other guards had emerged, and the tarmac became a battlefield. Emily huddled in the back, covering Lily with her own body, whispering, "It's okay, baby, it's just thunder." Over and over, her voice a thin, shaking lie. She saw Maximilian move. He wasn't a man. He was a shadow, a wraith. He moved from one point of cover to another, his shots precise, controlled. He was protecting the car, protecting them. The fight was over in less than 3 minutes. It ended in a sudden, ringing silence, broken only by the groans of a man on the ground. Maximilian wrenched open the back door. His face was splattered with something dark. He was breathing heavily. "We're leaving. Now. Go." He pulled her and the car seat out, and they ran, half-crouched, toward the jet, the bodies. She didn't look. She couldn't. They were in the air 10 minutes later, climbing fast, leaving the glittering, dangerous city behind. The jet was silent, a cocoon of beige leather and polished wood. Lily, miraculously, was still asleep, now in a small, secure bassinet. Emily was shaking, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving her cold and nauseated. Maximilian sat opposite her. He had cleaned his face, but there was a cut on his cheek. He watched her, his expression unreadable. He finally reached across the aisle, his hand covering hers. His skin was warm. "You're safe," he said. They were thousands of feet in the air, having just left a bloody battle behind. With an unknown future ahead, they were running for their lives. He undid his belt and moved to the seat beside her, pulling her against his side. She leaned her head on his shoulder, too exhausted to cry, too terrified to feel relieved. He wrapped his arm around her, a solid, living shield. This was their romantic night. There was no wine, no music. There was only the low hum of the engines and the shared, desperate relief of survival. It was a brief, hollow joy, a single moment of quiet in a life that was now defined by the threats they were fleeing. The danger had not been defeated. It had simply been outrun, for now. The island was not a part of any world Emily had ever known. It was a spear of volcanic rock and impossible green, set in a circle of white sand, rising from a sea of the most unreal, piercing turquoise. The jet had landed on a short, hidden strip carved into the island's interior, and they had been driven in a black, open-air vehicle to a house that seemed to be made entirely of glass, teak, and white stone, built directly into the cliffside. It was paradise, and it was the most secure, inescapable prison ever constructed. The first few days were a blur of disorientation. Lily, in the astonishing, resilient way of a 3-year-old, was enchanted. She chased small, iridescent lizards on the patio, built castles on a beach that was theirs and theirs alone, and was doted on by a small, silent staff who seemed to have materialized from the island itself. Emily, however, felt as if she were living in a beautiful, high-definition dream, waiting for the sound of gunfire to wake her up. She, Maximilian, and Lily were the only true occupants. The staff, she learned, lived in a compound on the far side of the island, and a rotating, unseen security detail patrolled the perimeter. Maximilian was not resting. He was not on vacation. He had exchanged his tailored suits for dark linen shirts, but his demeanor was unchanged. He had claimed the villa's high-tech study as his command center. From this remote oasis, he was waging his war. Through a series of encrypted satellite calls, he was methodically dismantling Marco Agnello's organization, moving assets, and fighting the political battle with his own family, his uncle Antonio, who was still furious over his abdication. Emily's role had shifted. She was no longer a liability he was protecting. She was the reason he was fighting. He was trying to build a new life for them, a world he could sanitize. But the ghosts of the old one were relentless. Their relationship, tested by violence, now had to learn to breathe in the quiet, the passion of their escape, that desperate, life-affirming night in the safe house, had settled into something more complex, more pensive. They were bound by trauma, but they were learning to be bound by choice. One evening, Emily found him on the veranda, a single glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at the deep purple line of the horizon. He had been in his study for 10 straight hours, his voice growing harder and colder with each call. She came to stand beside him, not touching, just sharing the space. The air was warm, scented with salt and jasmine. "You're not here, are you?" she said quietly. "You're still back there, in New York." He didn't look at her, but his hand tightened on the glass. "Marco put a price on Rocco's head," he said, his voice flat. "Not just Rocco, his entire family, his cousins, his mother. This is the rule. They cannot get to me, so they attack the roots. They are trying to make my men bleed me dry." Emily felt the familiar chill. This was the painful reality, the consequence of their life. Can you protect them? "I am moving them. All of them," and he said. He finally turned to her, and his dark eyes were hollow with the weight of it. "This is the life I told you about, the one I was born into. This is the stain that doesn't wash out." Emily thought of the life she had wanted, a small, safe apartment, a steady job, a playground where Lily could play without armed guards. It was a dream that felt like it belonged to another person, a naive girl she no longer knew. This new life, this existence of brutal, beautiful contrasts, was not what she had ever imagined. She looked at this man, a man who had killed, who commanded a dark empire, and who was, at this very moment, orchestrating a hidden war. She should have been repulsed. She should have been planning her escape. But she realized a profound, unsettling truth. She had felt more alone in her tiny New York walk-up, buried in overdue bills, than she did now, standing at the edge of the world with him. When they had been on that plane, when she had held her sleeping daughter after the firefight, she had not felt terror of him. She had felt a strange, fierce sense of belonging. "I can't live without you. Maximilian?" she whispered. The words fell into the ocean-hushed quiet. He froze. It was not a declaration of passion. It was a simple, stark admission, a confession of a truth she had been fighting for weeks. He set his glass down, his movements slow, deliberate. He stepped toward her, his hands coming up to frame her face, his gaze searching hers, looking for the lie, for the duress. He found none. "Emily," he breathed, his voice rough. "You don't know what you are saying. This is not a life. This is a sentence. I am a monster." "I know what you are," she said, her own hands covering his. "I have seen it. I saw you in that warehouse. I saw you at the airfield. But I also see the man who gave my daughter that wooden bird. I see the man who is tearing his own world apart to keep his men's families safe. I see you." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "I am not that girl from the bistro anymore. I don't know who I am, but I know I am not complete unless I am with you, even here, even with the danger." He let out a long, ragged breath, a sound of profound relief, of a burden finally shared. "You are my hope, Emily," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "You and Lily. You are the only part of this world that is not poison." He kissed her, and it was not the desperate, frantic claiming of the safe house. It was a slow, deep, intentional kiss. It was a promise. It was the sealing of their new beginning. His hands moved from her face, down her arms to her waist, pulling her flush against him. His body was a familiar, solid presence, an anchor in their ambiguous future. She molded herself to him, her fingers tracing the hard line of his shoulders, the tension he always carried. This was her choice. It was a choice that meant living with the ghosts of his past and the constant threat of his future. It was a life she had not chosen, but a man she would not, could not, leave. They stood there for a long time, two silhouettes against the dying light, a family forged in violence, now clinging to a fragile, dangerous hope. The danger was still out there, a shadow lingering just beyond the horizon, but for the first time, they were truly facing it together. The paradise held its breath for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of warm, salt-scented air, of Lily's laughter echoing on the private beach, of watching her daughter, her skin kissed brown by the sun, learn the names of tropical flowers. For Emily, it was a period of profound and terrifying peace. The world shrank to the shoreline of the island. Her love for Maximilian, no longer forged in the fires of immediate survival, had settled into something deep and steady, a shared rhythm of quiet mornings and long, pensive nights. He was different here. The tension he always carried in his shoulders had eased. He would sit on the sand, his linen pants rolled up, and watch Lily with an expression of such tender, aching wonder that it made Emily's heart clench. He was in his study less, and at her side more. It was a fragile, impossible dream, and Emily found herself praying to a God she hadn't spoken to in years. Just one more day like this. The day it broke, the sky was a hard, cloudless blue. The satellite phone on the veranda, silent for so long, rang with a shrill, piercing cry that sounded like a violation. They were eating lunch, a simple meal of fresh fish and fruit. Lily was napping inside. Maximilian froze, his fork halfway to his mouth, the look that crossed his face. The instant transformation from relaxed lover to cold predator made Emily's stomach drop. He walked to the console. It was not a call. It was an incoming video link. He accepted it. The face that filled the screen was smiling. It was a broad, charismatic smile that didn't touch the dead. Gray eyes. The man had a scar down his cheek. It was Marco Agnello. "Good afternoon, Montgomery," he said, his voice a cheerful, mocking drawl. "I do hope I'm not interrupting your island. It is beautiful. My compliments to your decorator, but your security is, shall we say, a little distracted." Maximilian's body was rigid. "What do you want, Marco?" "What do I want?" Marco laughed. "I want to finish our business. I find, in our line of work, that it is so important to clean up after oneself. And you, my friend, you are a very messy man." He stepped aside. The camera view widened. They were in a dark concrete room, bound to a steel chair. His face bruised and swollen was Maximilian's uncle, Antonio. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. "Your family," Marco continued, circling Antonio, "has no loyalty. Your uncle here. He came to me. He wanted to make a deal. He would give me your location, your woman, your child, in exchange for him taking over your seat. But I don't like traitors." He patted Antonio's bleeding cheek. "So, I made a better deal." "He's all yours, Marco," Maximilian said, his voice a sheet of ice. "He's no family of mine." Ah, Marco tutted. "That's the cold-blooded boss we all know. But you see, it's not about him. It's about you. It's about proving a point. Your family is poison, Montgomery, and I am the antidote." Marco leaned into the camera, his eyes finding Emily's, though she was off-screen. "I know she's there. I know you have the child, and I know you have nowhere left to run. So, I am giving you a choice." He gave an address, a warehouse, Red Hook, Brooklyn. 24 hours, Marco said, his smile vanishing. "You will come here. You will sign over your entire territory, your shipping lines, your accounts, everything. And in exchange, I will let your woman and the child live a life of quiet, blissful poverty. You'll stay with me. As for your uncle..." He shrugged. "Business is business." The screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier and more suffocating than the humid air. The choice was a mockery. It was not a choice. It was an execution order. "He's found us," Emily whispered, the words dry in her throat. He knows." He doesn't know where we are, Maximilian said, his back to her. He was staring at the blank screen. Not precisely, but he knows I'm not in New York, and he has Antonio. You can't go, she said, though she knew the words were useless. It's a trap. It's suicide. He turned, and the man she had loved for 3 weeks was gone. This was the man from the alley, the man from the warehouse. This was the boss, and his eyes were black with a cold, absolute resolve. Yes, he said, it is a trap. So what do? We run. We run again. There are other islands. No. His voice was final. He was right about one thing. We are messy. I have been running, hiding, protecting. I have been fighting a war on 2 fronts, against him and against my own family. It is time to end it. End it, she cried, her voice rising. He will kill you. He will put a bullet in your head the second you walk in that door. He will try, Maximilian said. He walked to her, his hands coming to rest on her arms. His touch was firm, grounding. Listen to me, Emily. There is no island far enough. There is no name we can change, no life we can build, that this shadow will not find. I will not have you and Lily looking over your shoulders for the rest of your lives. She saw the decision in his eyes. He wasn't just going to face his enemy. He was going to become the monster he had been holding at bay. This is the final decision, he said, his voice softer, but no less firm. This is the battle for all of it. He has given me an ultimatum, but he has also given me an opportunity. He has gathered his entire organization in one place. He has my traitorous uncle. He has presented me with a single target. You can't go alone, she pleaded, her nails digging into his forearms. It's what he wants. I am not going alone, he said, a cold, thin smile touching his lips. Rocco and my most loyal men have been waiting for this. They are already in New York. They are waiting for their king to come and claim his throne. The choice was made. He was going. This was the life she had chosen, to love a man who was walking back into the darkness. I'm so afraid, she whispered, her fight collapsing, leaving only the raw, visceral fear. I know, he said, pulling her into a tight, crushing embrace, but this is the last time you will ever have to be. He was leaving in 1 hour. He was going to fly into the heart of the storm. This, she realized, was the final battle. It was not a battle of guns, not yet. It was the battle of their future. He was choosing to embrace the darkness to give them a chance at the light. She had to make her choice, to stay or to... What there was no or. There was only him. You will come back, she said, pulling back, her hands framing his face. It was not a question. It was a command. You will not leave me. You will not leave your daughter. You will go, you will do whatever it is you have to do, and you will come back to us. His eyes searched hers, and he saw not a terrified woman, but a queen, a woman who understood the price of their life. I will come back to you, he vowed. He kissed her, a deep, desperate kiss that was a promise, an oath, a farewell. It was a kiss that sealed their future, one way or another. She watched him board the jet. He didn't look back. She stood on the veranda, the tropical breeze pulling at her hair, and watched the plane climb until it was just a speck, disappearing into the vast, uncertain blue. The darkness was no longer lurking. He was flying to meet it. The silence on the island was no longer peaceful. It was hollow, a vast, echoing emptiness that amplified Emily's terror. For 36 hours, she had not slept. She had watched the sun rise twice over the turquoise sea, the beauty of it a mockery of the cold, sick dread coiling in her stomach. Lily, sensing her mother's fear, was quiet and clingy, and Emily held her, reading the same storybook over and over, her voice a monotone, her mind a million miles away in a warehouse in Brooklyn. There was no signal, no call. The satellite phone was as dead as her hope. He had promised to come back, but she knew the promises of men in his world were written in blood and often erased by it. On the afternoon of the second day, she heard it, the low, distant whine of jet engines. She snatched Lily from the patio, her heart hammering against her ribs so violently she felt dizzy. "Stay here," she ordered the housekeeper, shoving Lily into her arms. "Do not leave this room." She ran. She ran on the white stone paths, past the jasmine and the pool, toward the landing strip, her bare feet pounding the warm earth. The jet was already on the ground, its engines winding down with a metallic sigh. The door opened. A man stepped out. It was Rocco. His arm was in a sling, but he was alive. He turned and offered a hand. And then Maximilian was there. He didn't step out. He emerged. He was wearing a dark suit. His tie was gone, and his white shirt was stained with something dark along the collar. His face was a mask of bruises, his left eye swollen, and his knuckles were raw. He looked like he had been through hell and brought it back with him. He saw her, and the exhaustion, the coldness, the brutality. It all fell away. He was just a man, home from a war. Emily stopped, 10 feet away, her breath caught in her throat. "Max," she whispered. He crossed the distance in 2 long, limping strides. He did not pull her into a gentle embrace. He fell against her, his arms locking around her, his face burying in the curve of her neck, his entire weight sinking into her. He was shaking. He was home. "You're safe," he breathed, his voice a raw, broken sound. "You're safe." She just held him, her hands gripping the back of his suit jacket, her own tears finally breaking free, soaking his shoulder. "You're alive," she sobbed. "You're alive." They stood on the tarmac for a long time, the only sound the sea and his ragged breathing. He had won. The cost was written all over his body, but he had won. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, they sat on the veranda. He had showered, but the bruises seemed darker, more stark against his clean skin. He told her everything, his voice a low, tired monotone. He had not walked into the trap. He had set his own. He had used his uncle, Antonio, as the bait. While Marco had been focused on the front door, Maximilian's men, led by Rocco, had come in from the back. It had not been a negotiation. It had been an execution, a total, systematic cleansing. "Marco," she asked, her voice small. "Gone," he said. "And Antonio?" He made his choice. The finality in his voice left no room for questions. He had won. He had decapitated his rivals and purged his own family of its traitors. The war was over. He was now, in a way he had never been before. The absolute power. There was no one left to challenge him. A new, cold silence settled between them. He had returned, but he was not the same man who had left. The man who had carved a bird for her daughter had been forced to become the king his enemies, and his own blood had demanded. He was the boss, and she was the boss's woman. Emily looked at him, at this powerful, dangerous man she loved more than life itself, and she knew she couldn't. "I can't," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He looked at her, his bruised face uncomprehending. "What? It's over. Emily, it's done. You're safe. Lily is safe. I've made us permanent." "I know," she said, and she took his hands, the hands that had both held her and taken lives. "I love you, Maximilian. I will never, ever stop loving you. But I cannot be that. I cannot be the wife of the boss. I cannot raise our daughter in a world where her father's victory is measured in cleansing and finality." She saw the hurt in his eyes, the confusion. "I am not leaving you," she continued, her grip tightening, willing him to understand. "I will never leave you, but I am stepping out of this. I will not be your queen. I will be your wife. I will be your Emily. And Lily will be your daughter. We will build a family, you and I, but it will be our family, not the family." It was an ultimatum, more powerful than any weapon. She was asking him to do the one thing he had never known to separate the man from the monster. He looked at his hands, then at her. He saw the strength that had first captivated him in that alley, the stubborn, unyielding morality. He had just conquered an empire for her, and she was refusing the throne. He nodded, a slow, painful movement. "Whatever you want," he said, his voice rough. "However you want it." They had their new chance, but it was not the simple, happy ending she had dreamed of. It was a difficult, painful negotiation. They would build their family. They would not give up on the love that had been forged in so much violence, but they would have to build it on a new foundation, on an island, perhaps, far away from the darkness he commanded. He was the boss of the underworld, but she was the boss of his heart. And in their new, uncertain world, her rules were the ones that would have to be obeyed. It was a difficult, fragile new beginning, a path that they would have to carve out for themselves, with the ghosts of his past always lingering just offshore. The transformation was not instantaneous. Peace was not a switch he could flip. It was a structure he had to build, brick by heavy, blood-soaked brick. In the 6 months that followed Maximilian's return, the island became their permanent world. The villa, once a temporary safe house, slowly shed its sterile, temporary feel and began to absorb the markers of a home. Lily's bright plastic toys were a colorful, chaotic contrast to the minimalist white stone. Emily planted a garden of herbs by the kitchen, their scent mingling with the salt and jasmine. Maximilian, true to his word, began the separation. He was still the boss. The power he had consolidated was absolute, but he was a king ruling from exile. Rocco, his arm healed, his loyalty absolute, became his proxy in New York. The study was still Maximilian's domain, but the calls Emily overheard were different. They were no longer about war and retribution, but about logistics, stock transfers, and the systematic expansion of his legitimate businesses. He was channeling the vast, dark river of his family's wealth into the light, slowly, methodically, washing it clean. He was present in a way he had never been in. He taught Lily how to swim in the calm, turquoise cove. He ate dinner with them every night. He would watch Emily as she read, his gaze intense. Not with the possessive fear of a man guarding a weakness, but with the quiet reverence of a man beholding a miracle. The shadows under his eyes faded. The deep, ingrained tension in his shoulders finally began to unknot. Emily, in turn, began to trust the quiet. She stopped listening for the sound of engines. She stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. She learned to breathe again, her lungs filling not with the gray, anxious smog of New York, but with the warm, clean air of her new life. He proposed one evening, not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet simplicity that was more profound than any diamond. They were walking on the beach after Lily was asleep, the sand cool under their feet. He stopped and took her hands. "I have no ring. Emily, not yet. I didn't want to choose one without you." "Max," she started, her heart catching. "Marry me," he said, his voice the same deep rumble, but all the hard edges were gone. Not as the head of the family, not as the boss, just as the man who was bleeding in an alley. Marry the man you saved. Tears streamed down her face, and she nodded, unable to speak. "Yes," she finally whispered. "Yes." Their wedding was a week later, on the same beach, as the sun melted into the ocean, staining the sky in hues of deep orange and violet. It was just the four of them. Emily, in a simple white linen dress, her feet bare, Maximilian in a matching white shirt, looking at her as if she were the only thing in the world. Lily, now almost 4, was the flower girl, dropping hibiscus petals on the sand, and Rocco, flown in for the occasion, stood as the best man, a rare, soft smile on his scarred face. They did not promise an easy life. They promised a real one. He vowed to be her shield, but also her partner. She vowed to be his anchor and his conscience. That night, their love was not the desperate, frantic collision of the safe house. It was not the exhausted relief of his return. It was something new. It was peace. He led her into their bedroom. The doors opened to the veranda, the sound of the ocean, a gentle, rhythmic blessing. He undressed her slowly. His hands, the hands that had caused so much destruction, were now impossibly gentle. His touch was a question, a reverence. He kissed the places where he knew her fear had lived, the pulse point in her throat, the sensitive skin of her wrists, the hollow of her collarbone. "You are not a prisoner," he murmured against her skin. "You are my home." When she touched him, she felt the last of the tension finally surrender. The hard, protective shell he had worn for a decade finally dissolved under her hands. She kissed the scars, the faint white line on his cheek, the new, puckered skin on his knuckles, and she did not kiss a mafia boss. She kissed her husband. Their union was a slow, deep, harmonious melody, a silent vow that the darkness was truly over. It was a confirmation of hope, a physical promise that their future would be defined not by the blood that had been shed, but by the love that had survived. 2 years later, Emily stood on that same veranda, her hand resting on the gentle, round swell of her stomach, below, on the beach. She watched her family. Lily, now 6, was a flash of bright laughter, her hair a sun-bleached gold, running from the gentle waves. Maximilian, his broad back to the house, was crouched in the sand, showing her how to build a fortress, a proper one, with walls that wouldn't crumble. A small, dark-haired boy, barely 2 years old, with his father's intense, midnight eyes tottered toward his father, holding a bright red shovel. Maximilian scooped him up, tossed him into the air, and the boy's delighted shriek echoed across the cove. Maximilian looked up, his eyes finding Emily's. He smiled, a full, unguarded, brilliant smile that was hers and hers alone. This was the life she had never imagined. It was not the simple, anonymous existence she had once craved. It was bigger, brighter, and infinitely more profound. The shadows of his past were still there, far across the ocean, a world he managed but no longer inhabited. But here, on their island, there was no darkness. He walked up the path to meet her, the boy on his hip, Lily trailing behind. He kissed her, a soft, familiar touch. "Everything okay?" he asked. She leaned into him, her head resting on his chest, feeling the steady, peaceful beat of his heart. She looked out at the ocean, at her children, at the light that filled their world. She was not a victim. She was not a queen. She was a wife and a mother. She was, finally, at peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, like this video, and give us your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.